Ever stumble across old photos from the 1800s and done a double take? You see a beautiful child in a dress, but wait, that's clearly a boy. Today we are diving into a fascinating and often misunderstood piece of history, the era of unbreeched boys. We'll uncover why children were dressed this way, when boys finally got their pants, and what this tells us about childhood, health, and fashion in the 19th century. Get ready to have your perspective of history completely changed. For modern eyes, seeing a young boy in a dress from an old photograph can be quite shocking. It goes against everything we know about gender clothing today. But for families in the 19th century, this was completely normal. This practice was known as unbreeching, and it referred to the period before a young boy was put into breeches, which are essentially trousers or short pants. Hold on to your breeches. Many famous historical figures have photos of them unbreeched. For instance, this is none other than the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. This photograph was taken in 1884. He was about 2.5 years old. In these photos, the boy on the right is in a tunic-type dress with short breeches. The 3-year-old boy on the left is in something similar, but more of a dress with short breeches. This is the brilliant scientist, Albert Einstein. The photos were taken around 1882. This boy is in a dress in both pictures. The photos were taken somewhere between 1899 and 1901. This is the adventurous, risk-taking, famous novelist Ernest Hemingway. So what is this all about? Well, for centuries, children of both sexes until a certain age were dressed in very similar, often general neutral garments that resembled dresses or long gowns. This wasn't about gender identity as we understand it today. It was about practicality, tradition, and ideas about childhood itself. So, why did boys wear dresses? The main reasons were incredibly practical. One of the reasons was hygiene. Before disposable diapers, changing a child's soiled clothing was a constant chore. A dress or gown made it much easier to change diapers or to clean up a child without having to completely undress them. Another reason was cost and hand-me-downs. Clothing was expensive. Dresses were easier to make, repair, and could be easily passed down between children, regardless of their sex. A dress could fit a child for longer as they grew, making it a smarter economic choice for families. Toilet training was another reason. A dress was far more convenient than pants. This practical approach also meant that children often wore dresses that were open at the shoulders. This wasn't just a style choice. It was also believed to be good for their health, allowing for freer movement. This idea that children's limbs should be free to move for healthy development came from John Locke in the late 17th century, whose ideas really took hold in the 18th century and influenced child-rearing practices. On a related note, the absence of gender clothing went even deeper than dresses and pants. The colors pink and blue, which are so strictly tied to gender today, had a completely different meaning back then. In the 19th century, boys often dressed in pink and girls in blue. The thought process was that pink, being a more decisive and strong color related to the military red, was more fitting for boys. Blue, with its calm and delicate nature, seemed more appropriate for girls. This fashion standard was even documented in magazines and department store catalogs. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that these colors' meaning were completely flipped, showing just how recent our modern ideas about gender clothing really took hold. Beyond the dresses and velvet suits, another common sight in 19th century photography was young boys with long curled hair, often styled into beautiful ringlets or locket curls, as they were called. This was a fashionable look for boys up until they were breeched. This trend was often driven by the mothers who cherished their sons' early childhood innocence and saw the long, curled hair as a sign of their youthful beauty. In an era when children's appearances were highly managed, it was a mother's pride and joy. While today this might seem like a strictly female style, back then it was just another part of the unbreeched period, and the long hair was cut off as part of the transition into boyhood. So when did boys finally get to wear pants? This was a huge milestone called breeching. It wasn't just a change of clothes, it was a major family event, a public declaration that a boy was leaving babyhood behind and entering boyhood. It usually happened somewhere between the ages of 3 and 7 years old, though it varied by family and social class. But it was usually mother's choice. The breeching ceremony often involved a party, with the boy proudly showing off his new breeches to family and friends. It was a rite of passage, signifying that he was now old enough to start learning proper male roles, perhaps even going to school or beginning to work alongside his father. It was a moment of pride for both the boy and his parents. The way babies and children were dressed underwent some big change. Babies traditionally wore very long white gowns, sometimes called christening gowns. These were beautiful, but it could be restrictive and limiting the baby from crawling. By the late 1800s, there was a movement for children's dress reform, influenced by thinkers like Rousseau. People started believing that children's clothing should allow them to be more active and comfortable. The idea was that the limbs of a growing child should be free to move, allowing for natural development. This led to slightly simpler, lighter dresses for young children, moving away from the miniature adult fashions of early times. But then, in the late 19th century, a new fashion trend swept in, the Little Lord Fauntleroy suit, after the popular children's book of the same name came out in 1886. Boys, even older ones, were suddenly put in velvet suits with lace collars and sometimes even short pants paired with elaborate long curls. This style became incredibly popular and in some ways briefly brought back a more decorative and almost feminine style for boys. So when did boys stop wearing dresses? The practice slowly faded away in the early 20th century, roughly around 1910s and 1920s, as clothing became cheaper to produce and ideas about distinct gender roles for children became more fixed. Boys were breeched much earlier, often straight into rompers or short trousers. Today, while we don't put boys in dresses for everyday wear, the legacy of unbreeching lives on in some ways. For instance, many baby clothes for infants are still gender neutral, like onesies and sleepers. And of course, christening gowns often retain the traditional long, flowing, often white dresses, dress-like styles we use today. It is a nod to a time when all babies wore gowns regardless of their sex. So there you have it, the fascinating, sometimes surprising history of unbreeched boys. It's a great reminder that fashion, culture, and even our ideas about childhood are constantly changing. What surprised you the most about the hidden history? Let me know down in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the weird and wonderful corners. Thank you for joining us today. We invite you to watch all our videos from famous funerals to diving into the archives to find generations of history.